Good afternoon. Welcome to Hub 88 presentation of TechTalk on food, innovation, safety, nutrition, sustainability. Hub 88 is an innovation and accelerator headquartered here at Nokia. And our mission is to build the breadth of innovation and technical talent in the region. We are focused on all kinds of technology. The Innovation Center, we are, I believe, a catalyst in economic growth, looking at generating businesses, but also jobs to support those businesses. We offer product development, commercialization resources, so that's both mentoring and coaching, but connections to other businesses, other entrepreneurs, investors, etc. And we have, as we are going to learn today, a connection to the community with subject matter experts and putting on these tech talks on different topics. I will mention too that we have a 5G communication lab that would allow a company or an entrepreneur to connect their device or their app, their computer, to 5G technology as they're developing their product. We believe it's the only testing lab of the type in the Midwest. I wish to thank our sponsors. Of course, Nokia is our host here. We've been very a great partner with Hub 88 as we're headquartered here in this facility, but allowing use of other facilities like this auditorium. I'd like to thank Ice Miller, who is a sponsor, and also our law firm. And appreciate Representative Kim Stapleton that's here today, representing Ice Miller. West Suburban Angels is an angel investment group here in Naperville that works with startups, entrepreneurs, small startup companies looking for early stage funding, and JJR Marketing to help us with our marketing efforts. In addition, I want to point out to two other partners is Fox Build out of St. Charles and Make It Here out of Downers Grove. Those are pre-production prototype maker sites. So if you need to make something hardware oriented or electronic, those are the places that we partner with that you can go and get that done. So I will now turn it over to Lori Swanson, who heads up our Tech Talk team, and she will introduce our panelists.
I will. Thank you everyone for coming. My name is Lori Swanson. I'm the president and founder of InspireTech, Information Technology Search and Career Strategy for Women in Technology. And I'm the programming lead here for Hub 88. So just a little bit of housekeeping, I guess. We have made a shift in our Tech Talks from the third Tuesday, which is today. Going forward, we'll be on third Wednesday. Going forward, we'll be on the second Wednesday. Same time, 5 o'clock to 5:30 for networking, and then 5:30 to 6:30 for the topic. It's just the second Wednesday, unless there's something special going on or some other change that you'll see on the website. Otherwise, mark your calendars now. Second Wednesday. To talk about next month, I'm super excited about our topic. It's robotic process automation. And so and for those of you who have heard of that before, it really got its start in the financial services industry, automating document processing, essentially, but it's had a huge resurgence in manufacturing, warehousing. I was just talking with someone. They were at some sort of a conference, and CDW is doing it using RPA for sales automation. So it's going to be really interesting. We have someone from a product company on the panel. We have someone from a large consulting firm that has a RPA division that they'll be talking. And then we have a woman who is a director it would be great if you could find an architect or a CIO, someone a little more technical, so if you know anyone like that, otherwise I'll be scouring LinkedIn and I'll find them. So that is Wednesday, February 12th. And then the other thing is that next week we will have an advisory board meeting, Tuesday, the 21st, I think that date is, 4 o'clock. We're going to kind of do year in review for those of you on the advisory board, and then we'll talk a little bit more about programming. But one of the things I want to say is we are looking for, I'm looking for more people to help put together these tech talks. Just take 1 month. Oh, can you not hear me? Oh my gosh. I talk pretty loud. I can't believe that. I'm looking for help, and so basically it's very simple. You'd find a topic you're interested in, and you'd be the coordinator for the month, working with me. We'd find a panel. You'd do what needed to be done in order to get it all together. It's fun, and it's interesting. I mean, I was saying not too long ago that I basically am like, what do I want to learn about next? Okay, we'll do a tech talk on it, So that's why RPA is here, because I'm interested in that. Then I now want to have Nancy Monroe stand up, because she is the person that coordinated today's tech talk. So, thanks to Nancy. She's on the committee and gets to work along with her as well. And we meet, I don't know when, so whenever we decide, that's what we do. So now I want to get right to introducing our moderator for today's food technology talk. His name is Tom Lee. Tom and I came to know each other through a client of mine who knew about my involvement with Hub 88. They were in, where were you, Las Vegas or something, at a drone?
Yeah, we met at a drone conference.
At a drone conference in Las Vegas, and somehow I came up. Yay! So Hub 88 came up, really, and we talked and brought him into Hub 88, and he came in, no surprise, I don't think, once you hear a little more about his background, like 2 feet in, full body, he's all in, participating here at Hub 88, and on the advisory board as well, and doing more with drone technology, I think, and programming, so that'll be great. Tom got his, okay, here we go. Tom got his undergrad from Stanford, his PhD in physics from Berkeley, and he has a Northwestern MBA. That's like the real trifecta, right? Oh my God. So he developed it while he was in his PhD program. He developed an interest in entrepreneurship and startup. He calls himself a serial entrepreneur. And he, after graduating, continued in 2 startups before taking a break and working for larger companies as he was starting a family, and then pivoted into healthcare, and recently sold his healthcare IT startup. So good job. That's what we like to hear, the successes like that for tech founders. The other thing I can say about Tom, well, I always like to do, 3 truths and a lie. So you guys tell me. Tom has, he likes everything from Chinese pop to 80s love songs, true or false. He likes, it took him 3 years to learn how to swim in the deep end as a kid, taking swimming lessons. Tom brought his parents today to today's Tech Talk, or one of these is a lie. 4th one is Tom likes to dip his French fries. This is a nod to the food tech that we're doing. Likes to dip his French fries in ranch dressing. So which one of those is not true?
I know which one I hope is a lie.
Which one do you hope is a lie?
Swimming.
Don't dip fries in ranch dressing? What else? Keep guessing. Huh? Swimming. In fact, Tom has very eclectic musical tastes that span from Chinese pop to jazz to 80s love songs and classical. As a kid, it took him 3 years of swim lessons to finally be able to swim in the deep end. His parents, raise your hand, are here today. We have a scientist from Argonne and a woman who, his mother, who worked here for 18 years in this building, correct? So, small worlds colliding. And finally, he does not dip his French fries in ranch dressing. He dips them in mustard.
You're okay with that? Okay, well that's good. So I'm going to now turn it over to Tom. Take it away, introduce the panel, and we're thrilled to have you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
All right, great. I thought a good way to start is just I'm just going to kind of go down the line here and everyone sort of give a quick 60-second, quick self-intro and then a little bit of an elevator pitch or the Willis Tower version of an elevator pitch, 60 seconds instead of 30 seconds. And tell everyone a little bit about what you do. So, Mark, I'll start with you.
My name is Mark Asmussen, and I'm a lifelong food service salesperson. I work in the food industry, and I'm lucky enough to work for a company called Beyond Meat, which in 2009 would have probably been sitting in the audience trying to learn about, how to get help in innovation, which is when they really started down the plant-based. So Beyond Meat is one of the category leaders in plant-based protein, based in California, designed on the East Coast and developed in Columbia, Missouri. And from the innovation and the tech side, I can't speak to any of that. I am the execution guy. So really my knowledge and my value to a conversation like this is taking things and how is it, adapted in the marketplace and how is it accepted in the marketplace and how do we go about educating people as to the innovation and teaching them why it's safe and healthier and all those types of things. So that's really where my value comes and is what I do every day.
Awesome. Aidan?
Cool. So my name is Aidan Mouat. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Hazel Technologies. We as a company exist to use proprietary biotechnology to extend the shelf life of fruits and vegetables in an effort to prevent spoilage waste and increase the sustainability of the food system. We do this in a way that allows us to control atmospheric chemistry around the food. And so a big goal that we have is to add no new chemicals into the food supply. First of all, because there's a significant amount of consumer preference in that concept, but secondly, because we believe in high-value biochemistry as the way of the future. How we're going to stop waste without having to continually introduce new inputs into the food system. My background is in chemistry. I did my PhD at Northwestern in 2016. Now we started the company in 2015, so we've been doing it for in fact, LinkedIn informed me just yesterday. It was my 5th year anniversary. I had no idea, but good to be here. So I'm deep on the technology side. I'm on the business side. We are a venture-backed company. Actually, we share some investors with Beyond Meat. We've raised $18 million in private equity. The USDA has given us about $1 million in grant money. We're active in about 12, 13 countries. Last year, we serviced about 700 million pounds of produce, and we estimate that we reduced food waste in the world by about 120 million pounds, prevented the emission of an additional 100,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalents. So we're deep in that sustainability fight, basically. So I'm going to be the asshole technologist on the panel. I guarantee you that, but thanks for having me.
Brinda?
My name is Brinda Govindarajan, and I am a hardcore food scientist and a nutritionist. So I don't understand the deep technology as far as the information side goes, though I dabbled a lot in that. My background is grain processing and grain nutrition specifically. And I've spent the last 2 decades in the food industry, going through the supply chain, starting with commodities, ingredients, then going into CPG, QSR, retail, and now I'm back in the ingredient area as Director of Global Technology for Global Ingredient Technology. Don't confuse it with the other technology, which I get calls every day for. Global Ingredient Technology, focusing on the health and wellness ingredients that our company makes. Just to give you a little bit of what Tate and Lyle means, if you have Splenda or you've seen Splenda, we manufacture Splenda, but that's just a very small part of our business. We manufacture ingredients for the food industry. We started as a sugar company, sugar refinery, went into corn syrups. Now we sold the sugar, we are into syrups, but we're also making more value-added ingredients.
Thomas?
Hello, I'm Thomas Burke. I'm a food traceability and safety scientist at the Institute of Food Technologists. IFT is a scientific organization, nonprofit. We represent about 15,000 food scientists across the world. So our vision is to have a world where science and innovation are accepted and promoted as the ways to create a sustainable, safe, and nutritious food supply chain. I work specifically for the Global Food Traceability Center. My background's in microbiology and epidemiology, but over the years I've kind of spanned between the food science and information technology skill sets. We have created the GFPC, the Global Food Traceability Center, as a public-private partnership house for spurring innovation and food traceability efforts. We find that because there hasn't been deep expertise in this area, and because there are so many diverse stakeholders in such a dynamic space, that we are a way of convening them and promoting solutions and standardization efforts. The current effort that we work on is called the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability, where we've gathered 70 global seafood companies along with solution providers, national governments, and also sustainability nonprofits to promulgating and extending global standards to ensure that that there can be a unified framework for traceability efforts for specifically addressing illegal fishing and also fraudulent product and seafood supply chains.
Awesome, thanks, Thomas. So before we launch into a couple of questions, when I was asked to help moderate the panel, I just got super excited about this. And meeting you all, I think you can all hear we have a lot of different perspectives here, different angles in which to look at this problem. Because spending 10 years in healthcare is really clear, with obviously escalating costs in healthcare that I think we all feel, and many stories around that, quality issues around healthcare. From my perspective, the extent to which food innovation in the whole food system can have an impact on everyone's health is huge. And if we look at ways to actually start bending that healthcare cost curve, nutrition is probably the largest lever. Think of the food deserts and all kinds of other stuff. So I think this is definitely relevant. There's a lot of relevance, I think, to each of us as individual consumers, and also for many of us who are in other sectors that overlap with the food system. So let's start with kind of a higher level, because certainly most of you all here are not of the food industry. And we thought it'd be good to kind of go around and really talk a little bit about, what is the food industry's greatest challenge at a macro level, and how does it need to transform to really meet that greatest challenge? So Aidan, why don't you lead off, and then we'll go around.
So I think it's a very interesting question, because I view the food industry, the supply chain as a whole, as a series of interrelationships. I always use the three legs of a stool analogy. And for me, as on the technology side, I think about the pre-farm gate practices. So you've got production, you've got essentially the growth process that give us most of the food that we eat. And there's technologies associated with yield and productivity and quality of product and so forth. Then you've got the supply chain part, which is, how do we get food from point A to point B? How do we take it from a centralized agricultural center and then distribute perishable goods throughout the food supply system to all of the different people that live in all the different places? And then lastly, you have the consumer acceptance piece. And that has to do with behavior modification. Beyond Meat's a great example. Secondary marketplaces are a great example. Folks that are trying to change the way that a consumer shapes their dinner plate in order to create the right level of economic demand for that food to actually pass through the rest of the system. So there's the enablers, and then there's the purchasers, right? In my opinion, I think that as a post-industrial society in the United States and several other places in the world, the average consumer tends to be fairly disconnected from the mechanics of how food gets to them from point A to point B, whether that's not knowing where a thing comes from when you purchase it at a grocery store, or even going so far, and I don't mean this in an insulting way, I have no problem with this business model, but even going so far as to have people bring you a pre-prepared meal to your front door where you did none of the work in sourcing any of those ingredients. It's a very interesting issue. So I don't work in the consumer behavior modification piece, but even as a technologist, I know that when I provide technologies that extend the shelf life of food, that's the smaller part of the equation. The larger part of the equation is who's going to buy it, at what price, when and where. So in terms of challenges that face the food system, I think consumer education, market identification, and the act of getting people involved in understanding the path, the food that they eat, how it gets to them, and what it costs to get it to them, I think that's the biggest problem. And I think we're all in some way working on that. even my company, which is a biochemistry company, spends a lot of time and effort engaging the public in conversation, science education, technology education, food education, getting people interested in something that they view as something fundamental to the way that they live and yet have very little personal interaction with. That to me has always been, I think, the most interesting frontier of the food industry.
Yeah, that's great. And it's, just really kind of reflect back, it's, really that end consumer at scale, and there's also cultural issues here too. And you mentioned you work in multiple countries, where I can imagine that there's a lot of variation in terms of what might work great in this country as far as being able to get consumers on board may be very different.
I heard there's a fantastic quote I was told once by a mentor of mine, a guy named Sandler Verstellen, and he said, food is the most intimate thing in the modern market because you put it inside yourself. And I think that's fascinating because intimacy is both good and bad. You have a relationship with food, but I'm also a scientist, meaning that just because you feel a certain way about something doesn't mean that that's correct. It doesn't mean it's good for the world, it doesn't mean it's good for you. And so the balance between how you feel about what you're eating and the choices that you choose to make as part of the modern marketplace, I think that's where we have to be the most responsible people we possibly can. So I agree completely. And that changes culture, obviously.
Brinda?
Well, I want to come from the consumer side. I totally agree with Aidan's point of view, where the supply chain, a lot of it is hidden to the consumer. However, when we sell something, that's the first thing you think of, right? From a consumer point of view, in my opinion, working across the chain, particularly in retail and QSR, where we had direct connection with the consumer, I think food safety is the number one issue. People want to know, they won't believe the manufacturers, they believe the retailers, they believe the restaurants, they think that they are going to be safe when they eat the food. But it's on the onus of all of these people who provide the food to make sure the food that reaches the consumer is very safe. That's number one problem. Number two is more from a sustainability perspective, where Aidan is working on the area on food wastage. If we can just stop or even minimize the wastage that we have, I think food will be available for everybody. They said 2050, we're going to reach 9 billion. I mean, 2050 seems so far off, but now we are in 2020, right? It's not too far away for us. And the third thing I would like to say is the consumers dictate what we do. So even though we want to manufacture this, and this in the best possible way, they are going to tell me, I want this and I don't want this. And that's always something that dictates business models and business values for us. So I think consumer, what we sell, who buys it, what we sell, and how it's made are all very important issues for us. And when we go to the next stage, then I can talk a little bit more about how it impacts myself, our company as well. So.
Yes. Thomas?
Yeah, you guys kind of headed out the supply chain component of this, but I will say and add to it. In my view, and I've always centered around what work are we doing to address climate change and the impact of the food and agriculture industry on that. So, in my opinion, the food industry's greatest challenge is meeting their commitments and creating a system where there can be equitable changes across the supply chain to ensure that we are addressing climate change. So a lot of what we were running into in traceability and the challenge that we ran into is that how do we, because there has been some built-in opacity into the food supply chain. So a lot of the reason why there is limited information from the source all the way to the end of the supply chain, the retailer food service, is because the way that you are able to make money and the way that you're able to have profitability in such a low margin sector is that there needs to, at some level, limited information is very useful. So in opening that transparency and understanding and building mechanisms to have greater accountability and sustainability claims, how do we also ensure that there is equitability across stakeholders? And then also balancing that though with the classical reasons why there are food waste and loss is that the food waste and losses have been built into the industry because we want to address concerns in food safety and potentially contaminated products. So the classic phrase of "if in doubt, throw it out" is still the paradigm, and it is really balancing what is safe and what are and quantifying
like a typical stat around the level of food waste that exists in this country and the world as a percentage of production or whatever, would be important for us to know, to get a sense for the scale of that problem.
It's about a third.
About a third.
Of everything produced goes to waste. So in a $3 trillion food industry, it's about $1 trillion of waste.
Quick answer, and raise your hand if you think that about a third of your food that you buy at the grocery store goes unused and you throw it out.
Actually, there's a worse stat than that for consumers. Yeah,
Is that
because
right?
that's not broken down by segment. So you've got the three largest categories of food waste are pre-farm gate losses, so mechanical damage, rots, splits, coals, things that don't meet aesthetic criteria fall into that waste category. Then you've got retail, where about 40 to 50% of the massive waste occurs. Now, you could argue that the 15% of the distribution slice then leads to the retail slice. But at the same time, that is where the majority of food waste is going because, and this is a very simple scientific reason, it sucks to warm perishable goods up. You put them into a place where humans go to buy them, you've just challenged the shelf life of your produce immensely. So we're literally killing it by choosing the way that we sell the food. And then the consumer piece is about 33%, 30 to 40%. So consumer waste is a significant component of the overall food chain.
Thank you, Brad. Mark?
Yeah, so I'm going to take this from the people that I talk to every day, right? What are their concerns? And you guys have all touched on it quite brilliantly. And as advice to people, never follow 3 PhDs on a panel.
No, you got to ground this. I mean, we're talking some bullshit up here. You got to come back down.
But I do have some stats that we talk about every day, and certainly, Thomas talked about, global constraint, and that's something that my company is, singularly focused is on global constraint. And, just the fact, and you touched about globalizations of, food acceptance in different areas, right? And if I had told you that beef consumption around the world is not even near the peak of where it is in the United States, and as it grows globally, and if we look at the amount of livestock that's already on the planet, and if you look at the fact that 50% of greenhouse gases are currently being produced by livestock rearing and processing, and then what we have to do to supply animals to the global demand that's growing, those are, that's a freight train, right? So that's what people, when I'm on college campuses talking, that's the general concern for people is how do we deal with these global constraints, and how can we shift through innovation to replace some of this stuff. And it's stuff that we talk about, my genius founder is about, how do we take some of these bottlenecks, we call them bow ties in the system, to expedite the systems to make it more streamlined and more environmentally friendly. And then certainly, again, what Thomas talked about was, is just having properly regulated. People have got to trust as innovation comes through, people have to trust what they're trying to eat. And that's something certainly that I deal with every day, is trying to earn the trust by telling us how we're innovating products and doing those things.
Fantastic. So let's now talk about your organizations pretty more specifically, because you're all either leading the entire company or playing some pretty key roles in terms of trying to really move the needle. So Mark, why don't we start back with you, and we'll kind of go back down this way in terms of from a Beyond Meat standpoint. What's an example of one specific organizational challenge and what would the ask be, right? Whether it be of people in your industry or people outside the industry, they're outside span of control, the key challenge of the organization and then what the ask would be.
Yeah, so from a sales standpoint, right? So I cannot talk to that about a scientific development or an innovation platform. I'm sure if you had some of the people as smart as the people to my right developing our products, they would have a very different answer, right? But for my answer, and it kind of talks to what Brinda was talking about, is it has to do not with just education, right? That's the biggest challenge I have going on in the market every day. That I can handle. My biggest challenge is the subterfuge that industries that have financial backing or financial interest to not address issues throws out there. And as a publicly traded company, I can tell you there is a lot of subterfuge that goes on in this marketplace that you read what you think are trusted documents or trusted media sources, and you just walk away shaking your head and going, how can that possibly get printed in XYZ magazine or newspaper or whatever, and I'm not even talking about bloggers or things of that nature, right? And it's just the amount of, and I'm going to use the word subterfuge again because it is intentional, and that's the biggest challenge is, you know, you're just trying to give people facts, but then there's people trying to muddy the water.
So what's an example of that?
Specifically, you know, listen, I don't want to call out, you know, at Beyond Meat, we really are trying to take a higher plane, right? And our founder, CEO, talks about this all the time. You know, he talks about the cell phone as we sit in a Nokia building, right? Cell phone technology and the way that cell phone replaced the landline, the landline people didn't go after, or the cell phone development didn't go after the landline business and say, this is why this is bad. That's not why what we're about. We're about saying that why this is good. And then, you know, the frustrating part is when you read articles in the New York Times or whatever, and op-ed pieces, and they link, you know, there was one specific that linked Beyond Meat to including ingredients that are found in household paint, you know, and you're just like, it's not even based in any kind of reality, and how does this end up in the New York Times? So, you know, it's driven by special interest groups and things of that nature. So, you know, that's certainly our biggest challenge is just not only educating people to what we're trying to do, but then try to fight what, you know, special interest has to gain by not looking at progress or innovation.
So Aidan, you know, you're on a great growth path. You've taken on significant capital. You're really, I mean, I get the sense you're looking at expanding, and you really had some great uptake.
Sure.
You know, what would be your greatest challenge, whether it be from in terms of, you know, growing and scaling your company strategy-wise, marketplace-wise? You know, what's your greatest challenge, and what would you be asked?
So, you know, and I don't want to do any disservice to any of the individual challenges that come with trying to build a company, and we're certainly in a rapid growth phase right now. I've doubled my headcount last year alone. But those are, you know, that's sort of the operations piece of building a company, right? You got to have your salespeople, you got to have your technologists, you got to have your business people, you got to have your back end. So, I actually, some of the things that Mark said really struck a chord with me, and I'm going to provide scientific validation because that's my perspective on the whole thing. But I actually think that our problems are very similar to the things that Mark just said. You know, as a chemical engineer, as a chemist, there are inescapable realities about the world. Thermodynamics being the biggest amongst them, and I'm sure that you can appreciate this as well. So when you talk about things like food waste, when you talk about ways to impact the food system, it's not sufficient to spend a calorie and to get a calorie back. You can't just put in one unit of input and say, great, I saved a unit of input somewhere else. That's just moving things around. You're not actually creating any energy, you're not creating any value at that point. So I think about a thing that the carbon cycle calculation that I did about our products a little while ago, and I determined, because I was very curious about this versus other market technologies, I determined that for every unit of carbon that we put into the processing of our technologies, in terms of the waste savings and the value creation that we generate for our customers, we save over 5,000 units of carbon. It's an incredible intensification. That's real value creation. You put in 1 calorie, you get back 5,000. Now you're actually doing good thermodynamic work. And I think that that perspective is heavily lost because the idea of science touching our food, in the US at least, has been marketed as a terrifying concept. And the people that have marketed it that way should be executed. They're awful people. Sorry, I call them like I see them. But that is not a service to the species to tell people that they shouldn't be thinking about the core realities of what it is to have inputs and outputs. You know, we as people, we're just energy cells. We take in calories, we burn calories, we exude calories. That's it. That's the nature of all reality, is physical inputs. And when you start to take the conversation away from that and start to talk about, oh, you know, doesn't this look shiny and pretty and this is the right thing to do? Is it? Is it ever the right thing to do? Is it really the right thing to do if you're not taking into account the impact of the inputs and the outputs that go into that system? So I say, look, that's a very abstract concept. A very realistic way of looking at that is we just did the LA Times picked up one of our Fast Company pieces and said, oh, check out this cool company doing this atmospheric biochemistry. They're not adding new chemicals. They're using active ingredients that have been known to be safe for 30, 40 years. And the LA Times has a 3.5 million person Twitter readership. And some of those responses to that article come back negative. And they say, and I'm not saying a majority of them, but some of them come back negative. And they say, oh great, chemistry, food, those two things should never mix. And I sit there and I go, boy, I have bad news for you, man. The only reason you're alive today is because of the Haber-Bosch process. So best of luck saying that chemistry and food shouldn't mix. And my PR agent calls me and he says, hey, we need to think about how we're going to have this dialogue with the public. And I said, I'm all for it. I said, the reason that we do this isn't just to do the science well. It's to tell people when they're wrong about what they're wrong in the natural world. Chemistry is a part of all of us. End of story. I've always believed that. And I'll die fighting on that particular hill. But that public opinion piece, again, that consumer behavior modification piece, it's difficult for us because we have to go out there and we have to undo the lies. And by the way, and also mistakes too. I mean, DDT was not a good choice. Agent Orange was not a good choice. There are things out there that chlorpyrifos, not a good choice. There are things out there that are problematic. But the way that they're treated in the media, the way that they're treated in public perception, have nothing to do with the scientific realities. And so that's a wrong that we're out to right because it makes an impact for not only how my company makes money, but we are never as a species going to solve this problem if we continue to be afraid of the technologies that enable the way that we live our lives. So.
Fantastic. So I'm gonna come back and we're gonna go a little bit off the question script that we're talking about. Because it's the end of the day and everyone needs to, get a little surprised. We'll come back a little bit to kind of transformation. How do we really need to change? If you had the magic wand question, right? But before we do that, let's continue down with Brinda. What's the greatest challenge and how to remedy it for your organization?
For my organization, I'll put it very simply. I mean, Aidan's too smart. I'm very simplistic. We make food, right? Or related to food. One, our raw material. Our raw material is a simple corn. So climate change has a big impact on our business. So that is a big problem for us. But that's not the only problem. Somehow or the other we get the corn. We source all the corn from this area, Illinois, Iowa, etc. The other problem, the big problem we have is the people that buy our products. And they are steeped in tradition, like what the previous two people on the panel told about. They don't believe. We transform corn, but we use a chemical process to do the transformation, and that's a no-no. So they want natural, they want non-GMO, they want everything else, and this being a global company, we have manufacturing here in the US, for the US market, who are a little bit not so skeptical about the science, relatively. Then we have a factory in Europe, because they just hug a tree all the time, And then we have one in China who's more cost sensitive. So the whole supply chain, you can't make it in one place. And I've seen models like P&G that has big manufacturing facilities in one place, in Jackson, Kentucky, or Louisville, or someplace, and they supply the whole world. That's no longer the case. Consumers want what they want, and they're not going to listen to reason. And that's a very big challenge for us.
Great. Thomas?
Yeah, so from our perspective at IFT, we oversee the global food science industry and the scientific community as well. And I think one of our greatest challenges is moving the model of innovation and scientific development in this new era and this and the way that the world works now. This is kind of coupled in two major movements, and I'll really just speak to one of them. Is that specialization is really great, and it allows us to create, innovative new products and also, new properties and formulations that work really well to specific components. But the new challenges of 21st century are really transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary hurdles. And in order to resolve those, we need to be able to have environments where we can bridge multiple skill sets together to contributing to developing system-wide solutions. So one of the approaches that we've taken in our effort in the global dialogue on seafood traceability is one of the things is that we understand the needs of fishers, we understand the needs of processors and retailers. What are their informational needs? What are their challenges? What are the business drivers? But then a lot of these folks though that are thinking about sustainability in seafood, that are thinking about how to think about what those aspects are in their operational needs, they can't seem to translate that to software developers, for instance. They just don't have the same vocabularies. They work in very different environments. They're used to very different products. So we've started to use hackathons or hackathon-style events in order to kind of do sprints to understand and resolve these technical challenges. But one of the challenges that we've had at IFT though is that as we've tried to, this works really great when you're developing open source software, for instance, and hackathons have been a commonplace, way of resolving computer science issues and for I don't know, decades almost now. But when you translate that to the food industry, where intellectual property is so heavily guarded and there hasn't been really a culture of open information, at least because that's such a market differentiator. That's one of the challenges that we're really trying to look at. But yeah, having innovative centers and quick sprints to find solutions, we've found them to be invaluable in bridging skill sets.
I'm just having a huge bout of episode of deja vu, because working in healthcare for 10 years, like, it's so analogous to some of the things that you guys are talking about, right? And in fact, through our discussion, we pretty much have answered all the other questions that we talked about. So, let's get to problem solving, okay? Because that's really what Helvania is about, right? It's trying to connect. You never know who might know someone, right? So there's at least two themes. So one is around basically PR or education, or really consumer behavior modification, or how to change people's mindsets, right? Whether it's within the supply chain, right? Whether it is among, in terms of breaking down barriers, interdisciplinary barriers, or whether it is just sheer consumer uptake, in terms of what's the acceptability, and that kind of interesting kind of tension between, is this technology, or is it just like better food, right? And is it really a disservice, for example, with one of your competitors, being at the Consumer Electronics Show and having this big hoopla around the technical aspect of it, is that actually really good for the industry or not? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about first this big one, which is the behavior modification piece. So if you had the magic wand, all right, we'll just say it's the Aladdin genie, but you only get one wish, you don't get the 3 wishes, or whatever, 3 or 10 wishes. It's the one magic wand. Like, what would one thing? And I'll start with Mark here on this issue. We'll kind of go down the line, and you can also face this towards whatever audience you want, whether it's a supply chain, whether it is crossing barriers among different disciplines. But so from your perspective, Mark, if you had the magic wand and you could change something, whether it's policy-wise, whether it's in the economics of the business or whatnot, that would further the cause of breaking through the consumer education modification perception piece, what would be that magic wand? What would you do?
Yeah, from a sales guy, it's funny that it is, Aidan touched on it to some degree. It is just open-mindedness, right? If to impact change, you have to have people willing to change, right? So we deal with so many people that are just unwilling to change, right? And I have data, all kinds of people, where the trends are going, and I really do think that the younger generation is leading us where we need to go on these issues. And I spend a lot of time on college campuses, and I can spot off a lot of data with regards to people shifting to either plant-based protein or alternative proteins, or shifts in whether it's produce or things of that nature through technology, right? At the end of the day, you've got to, from my aspect, we just need acceptance or trust that people are going to try and have faith that it's going to be good. And we know at the end of the day at Beyond Meat, we talk about all the different things, but we know at the end of the day, 70% of Americans, it comes down to, first and foremost, it's taste, right? When you're talking about producing food, it's got to taste good, right? So, from our standpoint, you'd be shocked at how many people I deal with on a daily basis that won't put Beyond Meat in their mouth, right? And it's just, they won't even try it.
Really?
Yeah, it's shocking, right? It is shocking.
Dunkin' Donuts, by the way.
Right? Dunkin' Donuts, a great
Well,
customer.
Well, because it's got such acceptance in so many consumer channels. And that's
Absolutely, yeah. But you know what? You get into more middle America or just certain parts of sections, factions, generational challenges.
What's the argument they go, it's not natural? Like, what do you
Yeah,
say?
I mean, I use this line, it's not gonna bite you back, you know?
Let's make this interactive. Please just chime in, you know.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to like.
No, yes.
I just thought I find it really fascinating.
Yeah, let me and kind of kickstart sort of the next round of just, you know, everyone jumping in here. So when you look at, for example, in the college campuses, and you described, okay, they're also more environmentally conscious, so they have kind of an additional reason to sort of take that leap. So going back to the magic wand, what is it about the traction you've seen in the college campus environment that if you had a magic wand, that you would want to take that dynamic or whatever's working there and scale it up beyond that?
Yeah.
Think of that's exactly how Facebook started. You guys all know Facebook started with Zuckerberg just within the Ivy League network, and it was like invitation only and all that. And obviously we know what happened from there, right? So what would be the magic wand to take it beyond the college campus?
Well, you need to take the thing that singularly exists at the college campus, particularly now, is passion, right? So if you could give passion to people to impact change, as opposed to, well, let somebody else solve that problem, right? That is the singular thing. University of Wisconsin is one of my largest customers, and I'm very proud to say at the University of Wisconsin, the Beyond Burger is outselling traditional beef burgers, right?
Wisconsin.
Wow.
Yeah,
Nice.
the University of Wisconsin.
Put enough butter on it.
That's it, butter. But
Or cheese, yeah.
right? So, but the key is too, you gotta remember, like, and I speak myopically for my vision, is that, 95% of Beyond Meat customers are carnivores. They're gonna remain carnivores, right? And it's not about, the average American eats 3 burgers a week. 3 burgers a week.
Wow.
If you could just take 1 burger a week and shift it, right? That's a 33% reduction. I don't need a PhD. I don't need Aidan to whisper that in my ear.
Your math is solid. Oh my gosh, you nailed it.
Yeah, so if we can just take that passion and take that out and put it into, more Americans and more globally, I think that would really go a long way.
So Brinda, what about your supply chain audience, or right, the other kind of audience that's sort of behind the scenes? What would be your magic wand?
We are one step removed from the consumer, everyday consumer. However, we see the trends. They are more interested in self, in well-being, in personalized nutrition, which is a very fast-growing field. And since we are not directly impacting them, we are one step removed. I wish the people that actually manufacture the food from the ingredients we supply would be more knowledgeable. That would be really nice. However, I think the time has come when people can't just live on their glory. I can tell you an example. Frosted Flakes and cornflakes, they were there for 100 years. Now the same company is buying RX Bar. So they are changing, but they don't know which direction to go. If they had that information to tap into the consumer, that would help companies like us, which service, we are a B2B company, and that will help us. So I think that's the big data to use that, as companies like McCormick are using big data for innovation. They have hundreds and thousands of formulations over the years, and they're using it, instead of repeating what they did, they want to analyze that and store it somewhere and kind of predict how the innovation should go forward. Same thing, some farmer organizations in Australia, they're using big data to predict the quality of wheat, the crop quality, the falling number, which is related to the bread quality, and et cetera, et cetera. So if there was a tool that we can magically say, okay, tomorrow the consumer is going to buy this, which means this is what I need to source from the food manufacturers, that would be very helpful. The education piece is always there. There's enough information overload, sometimes in a negative way for the consumers, but is there any way to keep pace with the consumers' changing needs? They're not the same. They want variety. The product life cycle is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So how do we predict that?
Makes sense. So we'll wrap up with Thomas here, magic wand towards your challenge, and then we'll go to questions from the audience.
Yeah, so we talked about the consumer education piece, and I want to really echo that in a particular way. I wish, if I had a magic wand, I would really like to decouple people's distrust of science with their distrust of large institutions, or the institutions that they see as encroaching on their day-to-day life. So they kind of become associated with each other. So I don't know how many of you have seen that graphic on the internet where it shows like there's all these brands and it's only associated with these 9 food or agro companies. But it's really just, a lot of consumers just have that inherent distrust of really large companies, of government entities, of even academic institutions they have active distrust for. And it, allows them to, get away from objective evidence, reproducibility, like tenets of science, which aren't really necessarily bound to those distrusts of those institutions. So, it's really, that's really one of the challenges that we have, is that there are these structural components to our global society that are contributing to people's, overall, tribalization and latching onto familiarity, which is why I think we are having trouble adapting to the changing consumer demands, because it's outside of just our domain.
Fantastic. So, Lori, I think we have a microphone.
We've got one here.
Couple microphones.
Yeah, I'd like to start things out. Great panel, by the way. I have a rhetorical question for Aidan on the execution method. And I was thinking maybe it could be something like the carcinogen saccharin that was removed from the market and just slowly killed them over time.
I mean, that's certainly an option, but I'm a humanitarian, so I believe that it should be more humane than that ultimately. But I mean, I think that this actually kind of goes to do you prefer Thomas or Tom?
Thomas.
Thomas, okay. I think this goes to Thomas's point, which is, and I don't mean to countermand that point at all. It is totally true that people need to be evaluating scientific methodology and ethics and so forth, using their own brains, learning how to digest concepts like reproducibility and phenomenology. But there's also bad actors in the field, right? And so marketing, branding, the influx of dollars into scientific funding, that's in a lot of ways where a lot of those issues, I believe, started. And so I think it's a knife that cuts both ways. People need to make better choices, certainly. But in my mind, I don't immediately say, well, institutional trust is the way to go, because this is not the world we live in, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not arguing with you, but what I am saying is that I think public accountability for lying should be very important in this context. And lying is a loaded word. Nobody in the media wants to say it. But scientifically speaking, you can distinguish a fact from a non-fact, period. And so that's something that I think would be helpful to the psyche of the average consumer and allow them to regain some of that trust. So I know that was a serious answer to what should have been a very funny question. And I apologize for that. But personally, guillotine. Come on. It works in the French Revolution. It should work now. Mechanically simple, use gravity, highly sustainable.
This just goes along those lines. I think I saw a quick pop-up yesterday, and I did not read more into it, but Fairlife had a lot of bad publicity of how they were handling their cows, and then I saw Coca-Cola bought them. So I hadn't much about that, but just adding.
Yeah, just
That's fair.
I have a couple of questions, if that's okay, if there are 5 of them. Okay, so the first is you brought up a number of issues, and so I was wondering, do you think that vertical farms could address some of the concerns that you may have raised? And if so, how can vertical farms be successful? Because it's been tried in Chicago, and I think it's failed so far.
It's failed everywhere.
And then
Despite what people tell you.
Okay, and then I have another question, which is not related at all, which is that I've noticed that some of my vegetables in my refrigerator last an unusually long time, so I'm just wondering, how did you do that?
I'll tell you a real fun answer to that, if you like, from a technology standpoint. So, without wanting to monopolize time, because the answer, in my opinion, the answer to the question I've read, I want to give anybody else a chance to respond to it as well. In my opinion, the answer to the question about vertical farms is very nuanced and very complicated, but it basically boils down to this, which is, if we're going to, so we're in a very unique anthropological position in human existence, which is the first time ever that we've ever had to choose a source of calories less dense than the predecessor. When we were burning wood, we got to move to coal. When we were burning coal, we got to move to gasoline. Tremendously energy-dense sources. Now we have to dig ourselves out of that efficiency pit because we have a problem with CO2. And the same thing is true of food calories. We got used to centralizing, and getting more and more efficient every step of the way, but now that system has a negative environmental externality. So vertical farms can succeed, but they can't succeed against the unit economics of the immensely efficient system that we've created for ourselves. So the short answer to the question, in my opinion, and I'm happy to talk about it, in another context longer, because I think there's a lot more to it, but we have to become accepting of diverse caloric sources as a species, and that will then allow us to normalize unit economics across a number of different markets that would then make vertical farming viable. 20, 30 years from now, I think it will absolutely be viable, because when you can't afford to buy a tomato from a commercial producer anymore because the land won't support the yield, you're going to go buy that tomato at $4.99 or $5.99 a pound from a hothouse producer. That's what's going to happen. That's what economics tells us about agriculture. And things like Beyond Meat are a great example where we're diversifying the beef caloric industry, a very, very high density caloric. So beef is literally the foundation of the Roman Empire. That's how we got that empire. An incredibly calorie dense source that we're now diversifying into less calorie dense dimensions. So it can work. I mean, Beyond Meat's working great, right? So I think that's an example where there's a future there for sure. As far as your stuff lasting longer, it depends more than you would like to admit on the storage conditions that the particular supplier uses. And I knew this because if you get a new fridge, you will suddenly find out that all of your stuff lasts like 2-3 weeks longer than it used to. Because your fridge builds up mold over time. You got mold and bacteria. Those are shelf life shortening microbes. So when you sterilize the environment, all of a sudden you got longer shelf life. So there's a lot of things you can't possibly control that will cause that to occur. To buy new fridges every week, you'll be fine.
I'm going to ask you, how often should I clean my fridge?
How dirty is your fridge?
I'm a guy, what do you think?
I don't think I'm coming over to your apartment.
So my question is, I think Brinda, you touched on this, that the non-GMO trends that are out there, the organic push, Aidan, with the technology that you're working on that sustains that, and you talked about, Mark, you talked about the subterfuge of what is going on in the marketplace. Is it possible to combat all those trends that sound like they run contrary to some of the things that you're trying to accomplish and create a sustainable and profitable business?
Yeah. No, I don't mean that dismissively. I think so, yes.
And we have been in business for 165 years, so 165 years, so it is possible to do it. It's a struggle, which we learn to cope or learn to face. Whether we can overcome it, probably not, because today it's this consumer, tomorrow it's some other issue. It's always going to be evolving, and there's never a dull moment, actually. When I was in the QSR industry, you talk about some of the things, the fads, the myths they have, like the pink meat and all of that stuff. Every day there will be 10 issues facing McDonald's. And every day in the evening, 5:30 in the evening, we will have the war room discussion on how we are going to respond to those. So that's going to be happening. Do we want to spend our time trying to fix that? Because it's totally out of our control. We just respond and protect our brand. That's what we do. It's a bigger problem on understanding what really comes to your plate, which people are getting more and more aware, but not always in the right direction. As a nutritionist, if you ask me, I'll tell you, eat whole grains. But then we make very purified fibers as well, right? So there has to be a balance in what we eat, and holistic nutrition is the way to go, in my opinion.
And I would just point out, by the way, the importance of having somebody like Brinda in this conversation, right? You've got a representative of a massive brand in the industry, in the ingredient industry, and not only that, but she is a scientist and a nutritionist, and she's here having this conversation. I think people are paying enough attention that it is, I mean, you're seeing an example of it right here now. So it's a great question, but I think we're making steps in the right direction.
Actually, to elaborate a little further on that, my master's degree was in nutrition. Then I wanted to go the higher education, and I consulted some of my friends here. They said, nutritionists don't get paid. There's not enough jobs for them. So go to food technology, right? And that's what I did, food processing. but then I didn't give up my nutrition. Now I feel like having both makes me stronger. I can answer to both questions. I can make better food or answer better for consumers who are vets, or also try to see how we can manage some of these things, even internally within our company. Do you think we should be doing this really? Do you think it makes sense? And I'm talking more not just from Tate and Lyle perspective, but from my experience with McDonald's as well as Tesco and all of these other companies I work for. It really helps a lot to know both sides. How many people I've convinced? Maybe just a handful, but even that is a large amount for me.
I have a question related to dog food or pet food, because I wonder about the quality of the dog food. You know, like you get a can, the dog seems to be fine. The next can, you know, from a different batch, you know, we don't know what made him sick, right? Could it have been the dog food? We don't know. But I mean, I don't know if the quality is there as consistent as it is for people food. And I always wonder, you know, like for shipping, you know, it's not control the temperature when it's shipped to your house, you know, with whichever, whether it be, you know, which transport it comes in. And then another thing I had was about food, okay, so I've noticed when I cook with, like, I make a lot of stocks, chicken stock and turkey stock, it just seems like it doesn't last a week. Now that could be because my refrigerator isn't very clean.
Those are just the confessions of people with dirty fridges.
No.
There's other factors too.
It just, but I'm still thinking that the newer,
Oh my God.
I worry that the newer poultry, that the fat, something's wrong with the fat in the new poultry that we're eating. It just seems like there's something wrong with it, and I don't know if you have any opinion about that. Thank you.
Well, I think to pet food question, it's the consistency and the quality. Consistency of manufacturing. It depends on the brand as well. Brands like Ions, like Science Direct, totally consistent. Batch to batch, can to can, not an issue. And when you make canned food, it's not about external, because canned food is quite stable for over a period of time. But then if there are people, I know I worked with suppliers that make old Roy food, and that I know the kind of quality of ingredients they use, and that is probably questionable. Old Roy? Old Roy, Walmart brand.
The Walmart brand, yes.
The Walmart brand.
Yeah, canning is a miracle. I mean, being able to heat pasteurize something in a can, that's about as rigorous as you're ever going to get in terms of safety control. So I would imagine, and I think probably Brinda would agree, that like, if it comes in a can, it's probably one of the safest things you could probably eat.
It definitely is. And the shelf life is 2 years for a can product.
Forever.
Easily.
It's just a fantastic way of sterilizing it. Because really what you're talking about is you're talking about statistics, right? At the end of the day.
A lot of them come dented.
Well, that has nothing to do with it. You're not. If the seal is still sealed and the can is not damaged, it's not breached. So it's awesome. It's an anaerobic container. You know, it's botulinum free because you can pasteurize it. There's nothing alive in there. It is as sterile an environment as you can possibly get outside of rinsing something with straight ethanol. That's good. So I would actually say you're probably in pretty good hands there.
And I will also say, like, my previous life was as a government regulator and for state food safety agency, and we considered food for animal consumption under the same standards and with the same behemothness in food safety considerations as human food. Because we also understood that, you know, there is still a possibility that a human may consume, you know, animal foods. I think we've all seen a video online where someone accidentally ate something.
You mean like this guy?
Oh, yeah.
So, not cold, okay? You see that little tongue there?
Freeze outside, but about a week for me to come up because the delivery happened before I, you know.
No. So the whole thing with the can is it's a pasteurized anaerobic environment. So this is in separate. Like for example, dry food I would consider more suspect because you can't pasteurize it, and because a plastic bag is not an airtight environment. So a can, you have no oxygen transmission, no water transmission, no bacterial transmission. You can heat that sucker up to boiling temperatures, cook whatever's inside of it. Nothing is going to go wrong inside of that can at that point.
It's frozen in the garage before I eat it.
It's not relevant. Yeah, the pasteurization process is a cure-all.
So it's still okay.
Yeah, We can talk about the Louis Pasteur spontaneous. No, I'm not making fun of it. This is a serious thing. There's a very, very classic experiment that was conducted by Pasteur. Spontaneous generation is the concept. And a long time ago, we proved that while statistically speaking, you can only count on killing so many microbes in a given environment. And so there are sometimes outliers. Spontaneous generation is not a thing. And so as a result, if you've cleaned out an environment and there are no inputs or outputs from that environment, you're not going to see microbial growth. It just cannot. It doesn't matter if you freeze it, warm it up, whatever it is, as long as you don't breach the seal, you're fine. And I can also give you some pretty good stock tips too.
We all have two. I have an observation and a question. Did you all see the news story this week about MSG and chicken? Mm-hmm. McDonald's, after going clean on their food, is competing with Chick-fil-A and
yes,
Popeyes for their tasty spicy chicken, and they're now putting MSG back in their foods. I'm distraught. And and it just.
But they have to label it. MSG has to be labeled, and that's how probably they found out they're using MSG.
Yeah. Well, it's got to be declared on the label, so you'll know if you're eating it.
Oh yeah, I know when I eat it. Yeah. And then to the Beyond Meat guy, as a person who eats generally vegetarian with one meat serving a week, I really enjoyed the Beyond Meat burgers before the company added that grilled burger taste to it. You're trying to fool the non-meat eaters into eating a Beyond Meat burger, but those of us who prefer not to have that meat taste, or the red bloody stuff running off of it now, which is beet juice, I'm like, ugh! I'm grossed out by something I love. But I did eat one for lunch today, and I had a black bean burger for breakfast. So my 2 burgers this week were vegetarian. But why? Can't you do 2 flavors?
2 flavors.
I like the idea that there should be a meat Beyond Meat burger and a vegetarian Beyond Meat burger.
So it goes to the fact of what our company mission is, because we get this question a lot, actually, right? And as much as we want our vegan or vegetarian base, there's not enough for you to build a successful business on. I call it quite. So we are attracting.
Consumers want what they want.
We need to attract the carnivore, and it goes back to what I talked about. To win in this category, to win in the mission of my founder, is you've got to attract the carnivore, and at the end of the day, it's 65 to 75% is that satisfactory umami flavoring that you get when you eat a burger, right? If we can't replicate that. And listen, there's still a lot of Boca burgers, black bean burgers out there still sold, but that's not our mission. And the biggest thing that Beyond Meat is reintroduced, and there's 2 different things that we talk about. A veggie burger is one thing, and where the growth that fueled Beyond Meat and Impossible is the fact that we're delivering protein within that mix, and that's really because once again I can quote stats. Americans are eating less meat, but they know that protein is an essential part of their diet. So that's really what's driving companies like Beyond Meat and plant-based protein in the category. So I cannot help you at the time being with that. 2 flavors.
Here's what I think. I think you're an expert vegetarian, but they're trying to create novice vegetarians. So you've got to start somewhere. You know what I mean? You've moved beyond. You got to be making your own goddamn thing.
Gone beyond.
You've gone beyond.
Was it beet juice or was it human, or is that another product?
So that's my competitor. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're beet juice. We get our culinary from beet juice. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Well, thank you very much. Let's have a hand for our panel. So as typical with Tech Talks, I come up with more questions than I came in with. But this food is very interesting to all of us, I'm sure, especially like Beyond Meats. Okay, we got something new. And growing up on a farm and being a farmer, this is really interesting to me when you talk about GMO, etc. It's a worldwide question, so there's a lot going on. This was very helpful. I greatly appreciate it. And so Hub 88 is an innovation center. We're here to help companies and individuals. And by the way, I was told my name is Ken Miller. I'm chairman of Hub 88. And thank you very much for coming, and hopefully we'll see you in February.
February 12th,
Have a good night.
RPA. Thank you.